So in this tutorial, the second last tutorial, we'll be looking at the final important texture map, which is the ambient occlusion map. For that, we're going to need to bake it in 3ds Max based off of geometry. So ambient occlusion, essentially what it does is it says if there was lighting all around this model, there are some parts here which would be less exposed to light, such as for example under the arms. So although if there was a light here, it would reach under the arms. For most instances around here, the light doesn't reach under the arms. So ambient light, ambient occlusion is, as the name suggests, if there's ambient lighting, which parts receive the most light and which don't. So things like here under these cables wouldn't receive much light. Things behind this backpack, even things around these edges here wouldn't receive a lot of light because, well, they would receive light if they would receive lighting if the ambient light was from here. But what if the ambient light was over here? They essentially wouldn't receive much light. So ambient occlusion maps make that transition of shadows due to the lack of light. They make it smoother. So in order to create those, we want to import our model into 3ds Max. Now that we have our model, we need to sort of create a UV, and we need to unwrap the UVs. So what I can do is go to face selection. Let me see if this is visible on screen. Yeah. So under the UV, unwrap UV, I can go to faces. I can use actually, let me just go edit here and see. So think they actually look like, it looks like it's unwrapped fine here. It looks like it's unwrapped fine. I won't edit the UV maps. All I need is the UV unwrap modifier here. Now that I have that, the next step would be to, okay, so the next step would be to go to my render setup, and under assign renderer, I need to select the mental ray renderer. Now that that's set up, I can go to the render menu again. Let me see if this render menu is visible in the recording. Yeah, I think it should be visible. So under render to texture, I get this dialog, and is this visible? Yes, it's visible. So what I'll need to do is, okay, before I resort to this dialog, let me go to the material, this one that's mapped to the mesh here. Replace it, sure. And what I need to do is I need to make the ambient light white here. And that follows the diffuse and specular as long as it's linked. So I'll make it white. Now back to this render to texture. I have this mesh selected. What I need to do is check off use existing channel. Make sure this is checked off, and leave it to channel 1 because that's where my UV unwrap is mapped to. Okay, so I already have one from before. I can delete this. Now what I can do is under here I can add an ambient occlusion map. Okay, is that visible here? Yeah. So I can add element, and it doesn't matter what I name it because I'm going to export this texture, and I can map this texture to anywhere really. Let me just send it, maps to the desktop now, and I'll just call it Data Smith A ambient occlusion. Leave it 32. That's 32 bits for 4 channels. I usually don't touch the other settings. Now I want to check I want to set the resolution of this because this model is pretty high poly, and its base texture, diffuse map and specular maps are like 2000 by 2000. I can use half the resolution for ambient occlusion. Make sure the element background's white. And now I can change the sample size to, let's say, 64. And the max distance, based on a tutorial that I saw on YouTube, they recommend, or the individual that did the tutorial recommended it be set to 100. I don't need to worry about baked material for now. I think I can proceed with rendering. Let's check it out. It's saying that my map isn't rendered to anything. It's not it's not mapped to anything. That's fine. I just want to export it. So continue. Now it's rendering. And this is the progress. let's take a look at this map and briefly compare it to the model to explain what I meant by some parts receiving more ambient lighting than others. So let's look at this. This is part of the, I'll show you in a sec. It's this one. It's this here. So these are the this pistol's vents. So as you can see, these vents aren't always receiving ambient lighting all the time, as opposed to the face here. For example, this face is receiving ambient light, like over here, all the time, most of the time, which is why it appears over here as relatively bright, as opposed to this pistol here, where you can see these vents have some darkness in them. And this vent here, for example, is very dark because it's the one that's situated down here. And this one can only receive ambient lighting from like these positions, whereas this, for example, can receive ambient lighting from all of these positions. So even these vents have different weights when it comes to how much ambient lighting they receive. So that's essentially what ambient occlusion is. Okay, so let me just close this. And so the whole purpose of ambient occlusion is, I think, in modern technology, rendering technology, they have ray tracing, so that renders ambient lighting dynamically in runtime. Maybe I think for older shader technology, there wasn't hardware that was capable of this. So they actually use static occlusion maps. They're not perfect, of course, but they give a rough idea of which parts always receive ambient lighting and which don't receive ambient lighting as consistently. So now that we have our texture, we can pick it up from the desktop, and it is a TGA format, so I'm going to convert it to DDS. Alright, one more thing. So when you export it from 2ds Max, what you want, you know what, I'm going to bake it again, but I'm going to change something. The element background should be black, not white, because that's how Donover 2 does it. So let me render it again. Overwrite the file that's there. Pause it and come back. So I've just rendered it again, and now it's leaving the blank parts. They're black in now. So now what we want to do is we want to flatten. We don't need the alpha, so let's flatten the image, and it should be good to export. Let's export it as DDS. AO for ambient occlusion, or we can stick to the relic naming convention OCL for occlusion. We can use the XT1 because we don't have important alpha information that we want to keep. Let's map it. And of course, you need an eye. You need an eye in order to be able to tell the difference that the ambient occlusion map made. I could do comparisons for you, but I can assure you that a map that's baked like this is fairly accurate to how much ambient light the different parts of the model would receive. So I've already explained why some of the parts are dark, and that should suffice as a tutorial. Overall, it does make the shadows around the edges and stuff that don't receive as much light. It does make the transition of the shadow a lot smoother. So there's that. Another thing about the FX editor is that it doesn't handle team colors. It always renders the black team color. That's why this light's black, this robe is black, and the eyes are black. So essentially that's how you bake ambient occlusion maps using mesh in 3ds Max. So go back to the tutorial and try it again if you fail. And I wish you luck. Thank you for tuning in. The last tutorial will cover, it's quite simple, and we'll be looking at how you can map your badges to the mesh, to a certain location on your mesh.